His family laughed when he inherited a dilapidated mansion, but his $150 million discovery silenced them all. Subscribe to the channel, watch other stories, and share this video with your friends. The steady hum of the highway was the only sound inside the old sedan as it rolled southward, leaving the sprawl of Atlanta far behind. Michael Carter's hands gripped the wheel loosely, his knuckles pale against the dark skin of his fingers. He had been driving for hours, and fatigue hung on him like a heavy coat. In the back seat, his son, Eli, had long since fallen asleep, his small head tilted against the window, mouth slightly open. Beside him, Zoe sat with her earbuds in, staring out at the blur of pine trees and swamp grass, her expression unreadable. Michael glanced at her in the rearview mirror and felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. 16 years old, bright and sharp, she had her mother's quiet defiance in her face. There had been a time when she used to talk to him about everything, but that seemed like a lifetime ago now. Since the divorce, a wall had formed between them, a silent one, but thick enough to feel every time he looked her way. He returned his eyes to the road ahead. The GPS had been useless for the last 30 miles, leaving him to navigate the old highways and dirt roads from memory of the hand-scribbled directions tucked into the visor. It had been years since he'd even heard the name of his late uncle Elijah, much less thought about him. Yet here they were, 300 miles from home, heading toward a place Michael had only been once as a boy, a place his family had always spoken of in hushed voices. The letter had come 2 weeks ago, written in the neat, old-fashioned handwriting of a county clerk. Elijah Carter was dead. No surviving spouse, no children, no other heirs. As his nephew, Michael was listed as the sole beneficiary of his estate, a large but deteriorated property located deep in rural Louisiana. For most people, it might have been more burden than gift. But for Michael, who was barely keeping up with rent and utility bills at his cramped apartment in Atlanta, the letter had felt like a strange kind of lifeline. He hadn't even told his ex-wife, knowing exactly what she'd say. A condemned house in the middle of nowhere? Take the cash and run. Except there was no cash, just an address, a set of rusting keys enclosed in an envelope, and a property tax record that showed the land was still technically his to claim, if he wanted it. The last sign of civilization vanished in the rearview mirror as they turned onto an even narrower road, flanked on both sides by looming cypress trees. Thick curtains of Spanish moss draped from the branches like long, ghostly fingers. The air through the cracked windows smelled of wet earth and decay. Zoe pulled out her earbuds. "Are we almost there?" she asked, her voice edged with impatience. "Almost," Michael said, scanning the roadside. "Just another mile or two." Eli stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, does it look like the houses in movies? The ones with the porches?" Michael hesitated. "Something like that." They reached the end of the road, and there it was, looming out of the mist and shadow, Elijah Carter's house. Michael eased the car to a stop and stared. The structure was massive, built in the old plantation style, 3 stories of weathered wood and sagging shutters, a wide wraparound porch drooping with neglect. Paint peeled in jagged strips, exposing raw timber beneath. Several windows on the upper floors were boarded up. The lawn had long since surrendered to the wild. Tall weeds and tangled vines twisted around the railings and up the sides of the house, choking it like a fist. On the gate hung a sign. Condemned. Demolition order issued. 90 days to comply. Zoe stared up at the house, her expression tight. "We drove all this way for this?" Michael didn't answer right away. The sight of it tugged at something deep inside him, memories he hadn't touched in decades. He remembered being here once, when he was 7 or 8, clutching his father's hand and staring up at the house with the same mix of awe and unease. His father had only stayed for an hour, long enough to have a brief, tense conversation with Uncle Elijah before they left again without explanation. "Wow," Eli whispered, pressing his face to the window. "It's huge." "It's old," Zoe muttered. Michael killed the engine and stepped out into the humid air. Cicadas droned from the tree line, and somewhere far off a bullfrog bellowed. The gravel crunched under his boots as he approached the gate. Rust flaked off when he touched it, leaving orange streaks on his fingers. The house loomed silent and still. He looked back at his kids. "Come on, let's see what we've got." They carried their bags up the weed-choked path, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the overgrowth. The front steps groaned ominously as Michael set a foot on them. The key turned reluctantly in the heavy brass lock, and with a long, protesting creak, the front door swung inward. The smell hit them immediately. Damp wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic like rust. The foyer stretched out before them, shadowed and cavernous, with a grand staircase that curved upward like a spine. Dust coated everything, thick on the banister, on the floorboards, on the chandelier that hung like a dead spider from the high ceiling. "Creepy," Zoe murmured, hugging her arms to herself. Michael tried to muster a reassuring smile. "It just needs cleaning up, that's all." But as they moved deeper inside, even he could feel it, the weight of time pressing in from all sides like the house was holding its breath. Every step they took stirred echoes. They explored cautiously, room by room. The kitchen tiles were cracked and stained, ancient appliances long dead. A parlor with faded floral wallpaper and furniture draped in yellowing sheets stood frozen, as if waiting for guests who never came. The library drew Michael's eye the most. Towering shelves filled with dusty volumes, a massive globe tilted on its axis, and a heavy oak desk littered with old papers. It felt important, though he couldn't say why. By dusk, exhaustion had overtaken them. They unrolled sleeping bags in what had once been the drawing room, too wary to spread out through the empty, echoing house just yet. That night, lying awake on the floor, Michael listened to the sounds of the house around him, the groaning of old wood, the distant whisper of wind through cracks in the windows. Once, he swore he heard footsteps above them, soft, deliberate creaks on the second floor where none of them had gone. He told himself it was the house settling. Beside him, Eli shifted in his sleep and whimpered. Michael sat up. In the dim glow from the lantern, Eli's small face was pinched with fear. "Daddy," he mumbled, half asleep. There was a man, standing in the door. Michael's heart thudded. "You were dreaming, buddy," he whispered, brushing the boy's hair back. But when he looked toward the open doorway leading into the dark hall, he could have sworn he saw nothing. Just shadows. He lay back down, staring up at the cracked ceiling until the sounds of the house became a lullaby of unease. Outside, the wind stirred through the cypress trees, carrying with it the scent of the swamp and something older still, something that felt like it had been waiting for them. He told himself it was just a house, just an old, broken-down house. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. Morning came slowly, filtered through the grimy windows of the old house in streaks of pale light. Michael awoke, stiff and cold on the floor, his back aching from the unforgiving boards beneath the sleeping bag. For a moment, disoriented, he forgot where he was. Then, the heavy smell of mildew and dust brought it back. The house, the inheritance, the 90 days hanging over his head like a noose. He turned his head to see Eli curled against his side, his little face peaceful in sleep, while Zoe lay a few feet away, staring at the ceiling with her earbuds out, clearly awake for some time. He sat up slowly, running a hand over his face, and tried to shake the sense of unease that had dogged him through a night of half-sleep and strange dreams. The sound of footsteps above them, too heavy to be rats, too slow to be the settling of wood, lingered in his mind. He told himself it had been nothing. He had to. By the time they ate a makeshift breakfast of granola bars and bottled water from the cooler, the sun was creeping higher. Michael decided that before anything else, they needed to understand what they were dealing with. The house was large, and they had only seen fragments of it the day before. Zoe followed him reluctantly, her arms folded while Eli trailed behind, clutching his small flashlight even in daylight. Dust rose in soft clouds with each step they took, their feet disturbing layers of neglect that must have been decades old. They started in the hallway off the foyer, pushing open doors that resisted on rusted hinges. A dining room revealed itself, long abandoned, with a massive table still in place, chairs lined neatly around it like a ghost of some forgotten gathering. Cobwebs hung from the chandelier above, and the silverware, yes, there was still silverware, was tarnished but intact, laid out as if waiting for a meal that never came. In a room off to the side, Michael found what must have been a study. An oak desk sat against the window, its drawers swollen shut from humidity. He tugged until one gave way with a splintering crack, spilling old papers and brittle envelopes onto the floor. They sifted through them carefully. Receipts for supplies, tax notices from decades ago, and, at the very bottom, an envelope yellowed with age and sealed in wax that had long since crumbled. Michael pried it open and unfolded the brittle paper. The writing inside was neat and deliberate, and though faded, still legible. "If you are reading this," it began, "then the house has found you as it was meant to. This place is more than wood and stone. The truth of it lies where memory sleeps. Look to the past if you would claim its future." Michael stared at it, his brow furrowing. He didn't recognize the signature, just a Lupin O. Iki at the bottom. He slipped the letter into his pocket, unsettled. "Dad," Zoe called softly from the far wall, "you need to see this." He joined her by an old bookshelf whose shelves sagged beneath the weight of books untouched for years. She had peeled back a section of curling wallpaper nearby, revealing something carved directly into the wood beneath. Symbols, circles intersecting with lines, arrows pointing inward, stars arranged in odd clusters. It wasn't random graffiti. There was purpose in the patterns, though Michael couldn't make sense of it. "Probably just decoration," he said, but the words rang hollow even to him. "Decoration doesn't get hidden under wallpaper," Zoe replied, brushing at the dust. They moved on, but the sense of being watched clung to Michael as they explored. In a bedroom upstairs, they found a child's wooden rocking chair, its runners worn smooth. It creaked faintly when Zoe brushed past it, though no one had touched it directly. In another room, Eli discovered a trunk with broken latches. Inside were old clothes folded neatly. Men's suits in a style that must have been over a century old. Women's dresses yellowed with age. Among them lay a pair of tiny leather shoes, polished to a shine that had somehow survived all these years. Eli lifted one, his small fingers tracing the stitching. "These are the ones," he whispered. Michael's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "The shoes," Eli said simply, as if that explained it. From my dream. The man had these. Michael swallowed hard and forced a smile. Dreams aren't real, buddy. Come on, put them back. By midday, they stepped outside for air, blinking against the brightness after so long in the house's dim corridors. Across the dirt road, a cluster of locals had gathered near a gas station that doubled as a general store. Curious stares followed them as they approached. Inside, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and wiry gray hair, Martha Jenkins, according to her name tag, watched them over the counter. When Michael introduced himself, her expression shifted, as if she'd expected this moment for years. "You're Elijah's nephew," she said, her voice carrying the rasp of long years. "Spittin' image of your granddaddy Joseph. Haven't seen his blood in this house since before I was born." Michael hesitated. "You knew my uncle?" "Everyone here knew Elijah," she replied. "Man kept to himself, but that house—" She shook her head. "It was your great-grandfather Joseph's before him. Fine man. Helped a lot of folks back when help was dangerous to give. They say he built tunnels under that property, hid people in them on their way north." Michael blinked. "Tunnels?" Martha leaned closer. "That house is old, older than most round here. Folks say it remembers things. Strange noises, shadows where no one stands. People don't stay long." Eli clutched Michael's hand, wide-eyed. Zoe, though skeptical, leaned in too. "What happened to him? To Joseph?" Martha's eyes softened. "Vanished. 1890s, I think. Walked out of that house one evening and never came back. Some say he drowned in the swamp. Some say he left and started over somewhere far away. But there were whispers of treasure, too. Money, papers, something he hid before he disappeared." The word treasure made Eli's face light up, but Michael only frowned. It sounded like small-town folklore, the kind of stories that grew in the telling until no one remembered what had been true to begin with. Still, the letter in his pocket and the symbols in the walls nagged at him. Back at the house, as the sun dipped low, they stood again in the library. The air was heavy there, dense with dust and age. Michael's eyes swept the rows of books and the massive desk, imagining his great-grandfather seated there, pen in hand, the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. Something crunched underfoot. Michael looked down and saw a section of rug slightly raised, as if something lay beneath. He pulled it back and revealed a small, square metal hatch, its edges rusted but intact, set flush with the wooden floor. A padlock, ancient and corroded, hung from its clasp. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Eli whispered, "Is that where it is?" Michael didn't answer. He crouched and touched the lock, cold under his fingers. He didn't know what he expected to find beneath it, or why his heart pounded as though the house itself were holding its breath, waiting. And somewhere, deep in the walls, faint and distant, came a sound like wood shifting, or footsteps retreating into silence. The night after discovering the hatch in the library passed fitfully, marked by dreams that left Michael drenched in sweat and staring at the cracked ceiling long after he woke. In his dreams, the house seemed alive, its corridors shifting like a labyrinth, its walls whispering in voices too faint to understand. He saw shadowy figures in the halls, men in old-fashioned coats, women holding lanterns, children clutching bundles, and always, there was the sound of footsteps above, slow and deliberate, even though he knew no one else was there. When dawn came, pale and heavy with mist from the swamp, Michael rose before the children and stood alone in the library. The hatch in the floor seemed to beckon him. Its rusted lock was crusted with age, and when he tugged at it, the metal groaned but did not yield. He ran his fingers along the edges of the hatch, feeling the slight give of the wood beneath. Something lay down there, hidden away for longer than he could imagine, but he would need tools to pry it open. Eli appeared in the doorway, still rubbing sleep from his eyes and clutching his blanket. "Daddy," he whispered, his voice trembling. I heard him again. Michael turned, his heart tightening. "Heard who?" "The man in the hat. He was in my dream. He said to look where the books end." Michael crouched down in front of his son. "It was just a dream, buddy." But even as he said it, the words tasted hollow. He glanced towards the bookshelves towering over the room. The sheer number of volumes was overwhelming, many of them warped and swollen from humidity, their titles faded with age. He had barely glanced at them the day before, but now he saw them differently. Zoe wandered in soon after, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her expression wary. "We're still here," she said flatly, as if expecting that by now Michael might have given up and taken them home. "We need to know what's in this house," he replied. "If I'm going to keep it, I have to understand what we're dealing with." She sighed but didn't argue, and together they began clearing out parts of the library. They stacked the books on the floor in uneven piles, brushing away thick coats of dust that made them sneeze. Beneath one towering case near the corner, Michael noticed something peculiar. The baseboard looked newer than the surrounding wood, the nails in it shinier, less corroded. He crouched and ran his fingers along it, feeling an almost imperceptible gap where it met the floor. Zoe joined him. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away, just pushed experimentally against the shelf. To his astonishment, it shifted slightly, scraping against the floorboards. He exchanged a glance with Zoe, and together they threw their weight against it. With a groan, like an old man rising from bed, the bookshelf swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a dark, narrow passage beyond. Eli gasped, clapping his hands to his mouth. Michael held his flashlight high, its weak beam piercing only a few feet into the narrow tunnel. The air that wafted out was cool and smelled faintly of earth, as though it had been undisturbed for generations. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low, and stepped inside. The passage was cramped, its walls made of old brick slick with dampness. Roots poked through in places, dangling like skeletal fingers from the ceiling. The floor sloped gently downward, and the sound of their footsteps echoed strangely. After several yards, they reached a small chamber carved out of stone and reinforced with timber beams. In its center stood a wooden table, and its surface covered in dust so thick that Michael had to brush it away with his sleeve. Beneath the grime lay objects that made his breath catch. A set of old maps marked with faded ink, small bundles of wax-sealed letters, and a metal candlestick that looked as though it had not been touched since it last burned. On one wall hung a cluster of medallions, each engraved with names and dates, dozens of them, some barely legible. Zoe stared wide-eyed. "What is this place?" Michael traced one of the medallions with his finger. "I think this was a safe room for people who were hiding." His voice was hushed, reverent. He thought of Martha Jenkins' words about Joseph Carter helping those who sought freedom, hiding them in tunnels beneath the house. This chamber felt like a living echo of that history, preserved in darkness and silence. Eli tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, look at this." He pointed toward one corner where a trunk sat half buried under rotting canvas. Michael knelt and pried it open, the hinges shrieking in protest. Inside were folded blankets, old tin cups, and a leather-bound ledger. He opened it carefully, its pages fragile but intact. Inside were names written in neat script, alongside dates and strange symbols, circles and arrows, just like the ones carved into the walls upstairs. As Michael turned the pages, he realized what it was: a record of every person who had passed through here, every soul his great-grandfather had sheltered. Each entry carried a weight that settled in his chest. They lingered in that chamber for what felt like hours, sifting through relics of the past, their imaginations filling with images of frightened families huddled here, waiting for nightfall before stealing away toward freedom. The air felt heavy with memory, almost alive with it. When they finally returned to the library, emerging into the stale daylight that filtered through grimy windows, the house seemed to watch them differently. Michael couldn't explain it, but the silence had shifted somehow, like an exhale after holding breath for too long. That night, however, the house spoke in new ways. As the children slept in their makeshift beds downstairs, Michael sat awake by the dying glow of a lantern. He heard doors creak open and shut softly upstairs, though none of them had gone there since dusk. A faint tapping echoed through the walls, rhythmic and deliberate, as though someone were knocking faintly from within. And then the whispers began. He thought at first it was wind through the cracks, but no, it was too steady, too intentional. Words too faint to decipher floated through the halls, layered and overlapping like the murmurs of a crowd. He rose slowly, following the sound to the library. There, bathed in moonlight from the tall window, he saw it. Faint smudges on the floor leading from the hatch to the hidden passage they'd discovered. Footprints. Bare, dusty footprints too small to be his, too large to be Eli's. He stood frozen, every muscle taut, as a sudden chill swept through the room. The whispering ceased, leaving only silence so deep it rang in his ears. When morning finally came, Michael didn't tell the children everything he'd heard, but he couldn't hide the tension in his face. Zoe noticed, of course. She always did. "What happened last night?" she asked over breakfast. He hesitated, then said only, "This house is trying to tell us something. We need to keep looking." And as he spoke, he realized how true it felt. The house wasn't just sheltering secrets, it was guiding them, urging them deeper. The letter he had found, the carved symbols, the hidden chamber, all of it formed pieces of a larger design. He knew, deep down, that they were only at the beginning. By the third morning in the house, Michael woke with a weight in his chest that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. The previous night's whispers had been louder, more insistent, though still beyond comprehension. They had seemed to come from every wall, weaving through the air like a net of sound he could not escape. Even after they faded, the silence of the house had pressed in heavier than before, as though holding back words it was not yet ready to speak. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched mug of instant coffee before him while Zoe scrolled aimlessly on her phone and Eli played with a small toy car he'd brought from home. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and mildew, and outside a morning fog clung stubbornly to the trees. It was then that Michael noticed something new. Tire tracks cutting through the grass near the gate, fresh and deep, the kind made in wet ground that had not yet dried. "Stay here," he murmured, rising from the table. He stepped outside into the heavy air, scanning the road. The tracks veered off toward the house, stopping short just outside the porch steps. The hair on his neck prickled. Someone had come in the night. Or, at least, someone had been here before dawn. He crouched to examine the ground. A faint boot print marred the edge of the path. Not his, not Zoe's, not Eli's. Back inside, Zoe watched him warily. "What is it?" He hesitated, then shook his head. Probably just someone turning around. But even as he said it, he knew he didn't believe it. The rest of the morning passed in restless silence. Michael distracted himself with practical tasks, sweeping dust from the library floor and stacking the scattered books they had pulled down during their search. Yet his eyes kept drifting to the window, to the tree line that bordered the property. Once, he was certain he saw movement there, a dark figure between the cypress trunks. But when he blinked, it was gone. By noon, they needed supplies. Their food was dwindling, and he had promised Zoe they would pick up more cell service boosters from the general store, even if it barely helped in this dead zone. As they pulled into the lot of Martha Jenkins' shop, Michael noticed a dark pickup parked at the edge of the gravel, its engine idling. Inside were two men he didn't recognize, both in mud-smeared work clothes, their caps pulled low. They watched him without expression as he ushered the kids inside. The bell above the door jingled sharply. Martha glanced up from behind the counter, her keen gaze landing on Michael before flicking briefly toward the truck outside. "I see you've had visitors," she said softly. Michael frowned. "You know them?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "They've been sniffing around since word got out that Elijah's place finally changed hands. Some folks think that house should have been bulldozed decades ago. Others," she hesitated, "others think there's something in it worth taking." Michael felt a chill coil in his gut. "What kind of something?" Martha shrugged, but her eyes were sharp. "You ever hear a story told so many times, folks stop caring if it's true? That house has got plenty of those. Treasure, hidden tunnels, papers that could still shame the right people if they came to light. People talk, Mr. Carter. People listen." He thought of the trunk and the hidden chamber, of the ledger filled with names and strange symbols, of the letter that had told him to look to the past. He thought of the footprints in the library, the voices in the night. "I don't want trouble," he said finally. "Then keep your doors locked," Martha advised, "and don't trust everyone who smiles at you." When they returned to the house, the truck followed at a distance before turning off onto a side road. Michael watched it in the rearview mirror until it vanished from sight, his jaw tight. That night, after Eli was asleep and Zoe had retreated upstairs with her headphones, Michael sat alone in the library with only a lantern's glow. The hatch in the floor seemed almost to pulse with presence, as though it knew he was too distracted to pry it open yet. His gaze drifted to the footprints still faintly visible in the dust, and then to the bookshelves where they had found the hidden passage. He heard it then, the crunch of tires on gravel. His blood ran cold. He extinguished the lantern and moved silently to the window. Outside, headlights swept across the overgrown yard before cutting out. The dark pickup. It idled near the gate for a moment, then the engine died. He grabbed the baseball bat he'd found leaning in a closet earlier that day and eased toward the front door, every muscle taut. Through the crack between the curtains, he saw one of the men step out of the truck, a flashlight in hand. Its beam cut across the porch, lingering on the windows before drifting toward the side of the house. A second figure followed. Michael's heart pounded. He wasn't about to leave his kids unprotected. He double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, then crept up the stairs to where Zoe sat scrolling on her phone. He motioned for silence, and her expression turned alarmed instantly. "What is it?" she whispered. He pressed a finger to his lips. "Stay with Eli. Don't open the door for anyone." Downstairs, he heard the faint rattle of a doorknob being tested, then another farther along the house. A low voice murmured something he couldn't make out. Suddenly, from somewhere deep within the walls, came a sound that froze him in place. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving rapidly down the back hallway toward the kitchen. Except they weren't his. He spun toward the noise, gripping the bat tighter. But even as he did, the sound changed, grew louder, multiplied. Footsteps above, footsteps below, all around, as though the house itself were alive with movement. Doors slammed one after another in a rapid succession that made the walls tremble. He heard the men outside curse in shock, their flashlight beams jerking wildly through the windows. One shouted, "What the hell was that?" And then the sound of retreating footsteps on gravel filled the air. The truck engine roared to life, and moments later its tail lights vanished down the road. Silence fell, thick and absolute. Michael stood frozen in the library, his chest heaving. Slowly, impossibly, the footsteps within the house faded one by one, until only the creak of settling wood remained. When he finally climbed the stairs again, Zoe was pale. "What was that?" she demanded. He hesitated, glancing back at the empty hallway below. "I think," he said slowly, "this house doesn't like strangers." That night, sleep was impossible. Michael sat awake until dawn, the bat across his knees, listening to the house settle. Once, he thought he heard faint humming, a soft, tuneless sound drifting through the walls as though someone were comforting a child. He didn't move, didn't speak. For the first time since they'd arrived, he didn't feel entirely alone. By morning, one thing was clear. The threats outside were just as real as whatever stirred within these walls. The men would be back, and next time they might not scare so easily. The house, in its own unsettling way, had bought them time. But Michael knew time alone wouldn't be enough. The hatch, the symbols, the whispers, they weren't random. The house wanted something from him, and if he didn't figure out what, he risked losing more than just the property. He glanced at Eli and Zoe as they ate their breakfast in uneasy silence. He owed them safety. He owed them more than that. And as he stared at the hatch in the library floor later that day, he realized the truth. Whatever answers they needed were down there. The house had been guiding them step by step. It was time to follow. The morning after the men in the truck retreated into the night, the air around the house felt different. Michael couldn't explain why, but there was a stillness to it that felt deliberate, like a held breath waiting for someone to act. He sat at the edge of the library floor, staring at the hatch as sunlight streamed weakly through the windows and settled over the dust in shimmering shafts. For days it had loomed there, a silent invitation sealed by a rusted lock that seemed to mock him. Now, after everything that had happened, he could no longer avoid it. Eli crouched beside him, his small hands resting on his knees. "Are we going down there today?" he asked softly. Michael glanced at him, then at Zoe standing in the doorway, her arms folded tight across her chest. She didn't say anything, but her expression told him everything. She was scared, angry, and uncertain all at once. Still, she hadn't left his side, even as the house continued to weave its strange hold around them. "We have to," Michael said finally. "Whatever's going on here, the answers are down there. I can feel it." He drove into town first, leaving Zoe with Eli, and borrowed a crowbar and bolt cutters from a man he vaguely remembered from school who still worked out of a garage near the edge of Mill Creek. The man eyed him strangely, muttering something about that cursed house under his breath, but he didn't press. By the time Michael returned, the fog had lifted and the house stood against a clear sky, its warped frame looking both decrepit and defiant. In the library, he set to work. The lock resisted, groaning and twisting until finally it snapped with a loud crack that echoed through the room. Eli clapped his hands over his ears while Zoe flinched visibly, her eyes darting toward the hallway as if expecting something or someone to respond. Michael gripped the iron ring on the hatch and pulled. It fought him at first, as though welded to the floor by time and rust, but then it gave way all at once with a sound like tearing wood, swinging upward on old hinges and exhaling a rush of air so cold it felt like stepping into winter. The smell that rose with it was ancient. Damp earth, rotted timber, and something else he couldn't quite name, sharp and metallic at the back of his throat. Beneath the hatch lay a steep wooden staircase disappearing into darkness. The boards looked solid enough, though they were slick with age, and a simple rope served as a railing, frayed and brittle in places. Michael clicked on his flashlight and swept the beam downward. The stairs descended into a narrow stone passage that curved out of sight. "You're really going down there?" Zoe's voice wavered. "I am," Michael said. "You're staying here with your brother until I check it out." "No," Zoe shot back instantly. "If you go, I'm going." Michael hesitated, meeting her gaze. She was pale but resolute, her chin tilted in that stubborn way that reminded him of her mother. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, but you stay behind me. And you," he said, turning to Eli, "you wait here. If anything happens, you run straight to Mrs. Jenkins' store and you don't look back, understand?" Eli's lip trembled, but he nodded. Michael descended first, the steps creaking beneath his weight. Zoe followed, her flashlight beam trembling slightly in her hands. As they reached the bottom, the temperature dropped sharply. Their breath fogged in the cold air, and droplets of water glimmered faintly where they clung to the stone walls. The passage was narrow and low, forcing Michael to hunch slightly as they moved forward. Symbols covered the walls, those same circles and intersecting lines etched deep into the stone as though carved with purpose. He ran his fingers over them, tracing grooves smoothed by time. They were colder than the surrounding stone, as if holding the chill of something buried far deeper. The tunnel opened suddenly into a larger chamber. Michael's flashlight swept across it, revealing rows of wooden shelves laden with objects, lanterns, iron tools, sealed jars of provisions that had long since spoiled. Against one wall stood several crates, their lids marked with faded stenciled words: bolts, nails, rations, and at the far end, a heavy iron door half buried in debris. "What is this place?" Zoe whispered, her voice nearly swallowed by the silence. Michael didn't answer. His heart was pounding. He crossed the room, picking his way carefully past fallen beams and piles of dirt, and crouched before the iron door. It bore no handle, only a circular indentation in its center, ringed by more of those strange symbols. He pressed his hand against it, and it felt colder than ice, leaching the warmth from his skin. Zoe shivered. "It's like it's waiting." Michael glanced around the room, his beam catching on a wooden table near the center. On it lay a leather-bound journal, its cover warped but intact, a brass clasp holding it shut. He opened it carefully, the pages brittle beneath his fingers, and read aloud. "To those who come after," it began in handwriting elegant and precise, "this house holds more than wood and stone. It holds a debt and a promise. Within these walls lies the proof of what we fought for and what was left unfinished." Michael flipped through more pages. There were sketches of the house, diagrams of tunnels beneath it, and notes filled with cryptic references. "Second vault, sealed, keepers must remain unseen, and, when the blood returns, so too shall the key." He looked up sharply. "Blood returns." Was that why the house reacted to them? Was that why the whispers had started the moment they arrived? Zoe stood close, peering over his shoulder. "Dad, what does it mean?" Before he could answer, a sound echoed faintly down the tunnel behind them. Footsteps. Slow, steady, deliberate. Zoe's flashlight jerked wildly toward the noise, but nothing was there, only darkness stretching back toward the stairs. The sound came again, closer this time. Michael grabbed Zoe's arm. "Run!" They sprinted back through the tunnel, their footsteps pounding, the sound behind them growing louder, faster. It was impossible to tell if it was real or just the house itself, but Michael didn't look back. They reached the stairs and clambered up, slamming the hatch shut above them with such force it rattled the floorboards. Eli stared at them, wide-eyed and pale. "I heard it too," he whispered. Michael leaned against the wall, chest heaving. The journal was still clutched in his hand, its pages trembling slightly. He stared down at it, then at the hatch beneath his feet. Whatever was down there wasn't finished. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Michael sat alone in the library reading through the journal by lantern light. Its pages revealed a story half told. Of Joseph Carter's secret role as part of a network aiding fugitives, of coded messages hidden in symbols carved into the house, of caches sealed away beneath layers of stone and earth. But toward the end, the writing grew fragmented, hurried, as if penned in fear. "They know," one entry read, "if I fail, the house must guard it. When my blood comes home, they will be shown the path." Michael's fingers tightened around the page. He was Joseph Carter's blood. And suddenly he understood. The house wasn't haunted in the way people thought. It was alive with memory, a vessel of unfinished promises, and it had been waiting for him. When he finally closed the journal, dawn was breaking over the trees. Outside, the world seemed still and watchful, and Michael knew what had to come next. They had to open that iron door. The morning light that seeped through the warped windows of the mansion was pale and hesitant, as though even the sun was wary of trespassing too deeply into its shadow. Michael sat in the library at the same table where he had pored over the journal all night. His head bowed, fingers clenched tightly around the worn leather cover. The words inside were etched into his mind. "When my blood comes home, they will be shown the path." He had thought he understood what they meant when he first read them, but now he knew better. It wasn't just a note to future generations, it was a directive. The iron door beneath the house was waiting. Zoe appeared in the doorway, her face drawn but determined. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. She looked past him to the hatch, her gaze sharp. "You're going back down there, aren't you?" He nodded. "We have to. Everything points to that door. Whatever Joseph sealed away, it's the heart of all this." Eli shuffled in behind her, rubbing his eyes. "I dreamed about the man in the hat again," he mumbled. "He said, 'The key is where the stars fall.'" Michael froze. The phrase leapt out at him. He flipped back through the journal, scanning Joseph's hurried script until he found it. There it was, buried in one of the final entries. "The stars fall in the room of quiet study. There the way will be revealed." The library. Michael looked up at the shelves surrounding them. Hundreds of books lined the walls, many warped from dampness. He rose slowly, his hands trailing along their spines until he stopped at one high shelf near the window. Etched faintly into the wood above it were tiny star shapes, so faint he had missed them before. His pulse quickened. He dragged over a chair, climbed onto it and pressed his hands against the shelf. It clicked inward with a muted sound and swung forward slightly, revealing a hidden recess behind it. Inside lay a small object wrapped in oilcloth. Michael pulled it free and unwrapped it carefully. A key, but not an ordinary one. It was made of heavy iron, its bow engraved with symbols matching those on the door below. Its teeth were jagged and intricate, like a puzzle within itself. As he held it, a chill rippled through the air around him, and for a moment he could have sworn he heard footsteps moving softly upstairs, though no one was there. "This is it," Michael whispered. An hour later, they were all descending the hatch again. This time, Michael carried a lantern instead of just flashlights, its warm glow pushing the shadows back further than before. The air was colder than ever, the smell of damp stone wrapping around them like a shroud. They moved quickly down the narrow tunnel and entered the chamber with the iron door. Michael approached it, heart pounding. He pressed the key into the circular indentation. It fit perfectly. The moment he turned it, the symbols carved into the metal flared faintly, glowing a dull amber as an ancient mechanism ground to life. The floor trembled underfoot. Slowly, with a groan that echoed through the stone like the growl of something long asleep, the door swung inward. A rush of icy air struck them as darkness yawned beyond. Michael raised the lantern and stepped through. The chamber was vast, much larger than he had expected, stretching far beneath the house. Its walls were lined with alcoves filled with objects, sealed wooden crates, stacks of old ledgers, bundles of letters tied with twine. Along one wall stood a row of display cases covered in dust, each containing items that seemed out of place in a hidden vault. Silver buttons, children's shoes, hand-carved wooden toys, and faded photographs of people long gone. At the center of the room stood a heavy oak table, and on it lay a single object. A sealed box, its lid inscribed with the same intersecting symbols that adorned the house's walls. Zoe's voice trembled. "What is all this?" Michael's hand brushed over the photographs. They were portraits of black families, some solemn and stiff, others smiling faintly despite the formality of the age. He recognized their faces from the ledger upstairs. The same names were etched on brass plaques mounted beside each picture. These were the people Joseph Carter had sheltered here, their lives preserved in memory by the house itself. He turned his attention to the box. The iron key fit its lock as well, and with a deep breath he opened it. Inside were papers, deeds, bank ledgers, and legal documents sealed with ornate stamps. They were dated from the years after the Civil War, and all bore Joseph's signature. Michael scanned them, realization dawning. His great-grandfather hadn't just hidden refugees here. He had safeguarded their property, their savings, their futures, everything that unscrupulous hands would have stolen from them. And then he had hidden it away, waiting for the day someone he trusted could set it right. Among the papers was one final envelope, brittle with age. Michael unfolded it carefully, and in Joseph's hand it read, "If you are reading this, my blood, then you have returned as I hoped you would. These records are the proof of what we did here and the means to finish what I could not. Return them to the families of those who passed through these halls, or their descendants if you can find them. Let this house's burden be lifted. It will not rest until the promise is kept." Michael's throat tightened. He looked around the chamber again, at the shelves of crates and relics of lives interrupted. This was a weight he had inherited. Not a house, but a mission. Suddenly, a soft sound rippled through the chamber, the faint hum of voices, layered and low, like a congregation murmuring in prayer. Michael turned sharply, lantern raised, but no one was there. Yet the feeling that swept over him was not fear. It was something warmer, almost reverent. Eli clutched his father's sleeve. "Daddy, they're happy," he said softly, as if he could feel it too. Michael swallowed hard and nodded. "I think they are." They spent hours in the chamber, cataloging what they found. Zoe photographed everything with her phone, while Michael carefully sorted through the papers, grouping them by name and date. For every crate they opened, there was more. Jewelry wrapped in cloth, heirlooms tucked safely away, even letters written to loved ones never delivered. When they finally emerged from the tunnel, it was well past dusk. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the weight pressing down on it had eased. The oppressive silence had softened into something watchful, but no longer hostile. That night, as Michael lay awake in the library with the journal on the table beside him, the whispers returned, but they were no longer indistinct. They were words now, clear and steady, though not frightening. "Home," they said. "Promise kept." For the first time since he stepped foot in the Carter house, Michael smiled. He didn't know how long it would take to track down every name, every family tied to this legacy, but he knew he would do it. The house had chosen him for a reason, and he wouldn't fail it. Outside, the swamp was silent, and the stars shimmered faintly through the branches of the ancient trees. Deep within its walls, the Carter house rested at last, its long vigil ending not in fear, but in fulfillment. Michael closed his eyes, the sound of his children's soft breathing upstairs steady and calm, and felt the rarest thing of all settle over him: peace. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Check out our other videos for more stories like this, and if this one moved you, share it with your friends and family.